Hello everybody, welcome back to our AP Psychology videos here. I hope you're having an awesome day. I've got my green on here today for St. Patrick's Day. But let's go ahead and get started with our modules for today's video. So we are going to be covering two modules today. We are starting unit number 7, and it is called Motivation, Emotion, and Personality. So this unit is broken into two separate sections though. The first part is just motivation, emotion, and stress. And then the second part of it is personality, because those are kind of two very large parts of the unit there. So we're starting first with the concept of motivation. We've got module 52 here about motivational concepts, like the intro to motivation. And then we have module 53, which is hunger motivation. All right, so let's go ahead and start taking a look at those. First, we need to define what motivation is, and it is a need or desire that energizes and directs behavior. That's definitely one of those definitions. You want to make sure that you know the formal definition of it. That is something that likes to appear on tests and exams and everything. So motivation is a need or desire that energizes and directs your behavior. It makes you feel like you need to do something. Motivation can be pushed or pulled from us. So there's kind of this interplay between the bodily push and then the pulls from our personal experiences, thoughts, culture, all those things. So our motives are what drive our behavior. And there are a couple of different theories that psychologists have looked at to try to explain motivation. We've got instinct theory, which is basically the idea of evolutionary, that perspective. We have drive reduction theory, arousal theory, and hierarchy of needs. So we're going to look at each of those different perspectives here for motivation. So first, looking at instinct theory, what is an instinct? It's some kind of complex behavior that's rigidly patterned throughout a species and is unlearned. Basically, it's just like a natural impulse you have to do something. You're born with this certain kind of reaction to something. That's what an instinct is. And we see this in animals with imprinting in birds. We have the return of salmon to their birthplace. That's not something they're taught to do. They just know that they should go back there. And then also any of the different reflexes we have talked about with infants, like their rooting reflex, the Babinski reflex, all those different things. Those are all examples of instincts. So what is instinct theory? In order to qualify as an instinct, the behavior must have a fixed pattern throughout a species and be unlearned. So that's our definition there. And instinct theory views our instincts as the source of our motivations. So it states that the motivation to survive is the most important motivation, and then any behaviors you have from there are all about things that aid in your survival. Those are the things that are motivating you to act in a certain way. If you think back to evolutionary theory with Darwin, all those kinds of things, the main idea with that perspective is we are motivated to survive by whatever means possible. That's kind of the same thing that instinct theory is saying here. That's why we have motivation, is because we need to do things that help us survive. So your first question here, instinct theory is related to the what perspective of psychology? Just mentioned that, so hopefully you got this one pretty quickly. That is letter B, evolutionary perspective. So we also have some physiological needs that create a drive to do something. So this here is starting to mention the idea of the drive reduction theory, which I will explain more in a second. But first thing to understand is that we have physiological needs, and those are certain needs that we have of like to survive. Your body needs these things to survive. So we have those needs, and then we have some kind of motivated state, something that will direct our behavior in a certain way. Then that is what leads us to engage in some sort of action. And that all kind of, the intent there is to return the body to homeostasis. So on the next few slides, we'll kind of break that down a little bit more. So what is homeostasis? It is our tendency to maintain a balanced or constant internal state. So it's just regulating your body to make sure everything's staying on a good level, your temperature, all of your different hormones, all those different kinds of things. That's what homeostasis is looking at. So with drive reduction theory, that's kind of what I was just alluding to on the past couple slides. It's the idea that we have a physiological need, some kind of need that your body has. And that creates an aroused state. It's a drive that motivates your behavior then to satisfy that need and restore the body back to homeostasis. So drive reduction theory is there's something that is driving you, that is leading you to want to reduce some kind of feeling you're having in order to return your body back to homeostasis, a state of balance. So if we look back at, I'm gonna go back a couple slides here, at this image here. First, with our drive reduction theory, we have some kind of need. So that's the physiological need we're talking about, like food or water. Our body needs those things to survive. Then, because we have that need, that means that it creates a drive for us. So our body needs food, that looks like hunger in us. That's what's gonna motivate our behavior. Our body needs water, thirst is what's gonna tell us you need to go get some water. So then you will engage in a drive reducing behavior. So I no longer want to feel hungry, so I'm gonna eat something. I no longer want to feel thirsty, so I'll drink something. All right, so that is what our drive reduction theory is saying. And you do need to make sure you know each of these pieces here. What's the need, what's the drive, what's the behavior, that kind of thing. So this is just a little bit more about how homeostasis works. So you can take a look at that slide on your own if you would like. But as I said, you do need to know those different parts of drive reduction theory. So let's put it to the test here. Carl is hungry, so he eats a hamburger and does not feel hungry anymore. Carl's hunger can best be described as a what? So think about the fact that hunger was like that middle step there. So that would be a drive. The need he has is for food. The drive is his hunger. All right. Now, move into our next point here. We do have incentives that can also direct our behavior into certain behaviors that we end up doing. So as we were kind of saying earlier, you might be pushed by certain physiological drives, but you're also pulled to do certain things because of incentives. So those are either positive or negative things that either make you want to do something or not want to do something. And we do need to make sure we bring up the idea of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation here. This is something that was discussed in Unit 4, which is about learning. And we said during that unit that you could kind of skip over those terms for now because we were going to talk about them in Unit 7. We are here, Unit 7, so now's when we're going to talk about them. So you might need to look back at your Unit 4 slide deck or in the textbook to find where these terms are. But what are they? So extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, those are different things that direct our behaviors. If it's extrinsic motivation, that means there's some kind of external reward that makes you want to do something. So there's something in the environment that is making you want to perform some kind of behavior. Intrinsic motivation is internal motivation. I will do something just because I want to do it. I like doing that thing, so I'll do it. So an example of each of these, for extrinsic, you could think about if you are feeling pressure to get your homework done by a certain deadline. So it's not necessarily that you're like, oh, I'm going to do this homework because I just love homework and I want to do this and be productive. It's, I know I'll get a bad grade if I don't do this thing. So that's your external reward, your motivation to want to get it done. All grades are pretty much an extrinsic motivator. Also, like, doing well in the AP exam, those kinds of things. Intrinsic motivation is you find the material really interesting, so that's why you do it. So let's say there's a class where there's no grade attached to it, then you're going to do it just because you like learning about that thing and you want to learn more information. So those are extrinsic and intrinsic motivations. And there is this other term called the over-justification effect, which can happen sometimes when extrinsic and intrinsic motivations are kind of battling one another, and then it leads to this backfiring effect of then it makes you not want to do something at all. So essentially, let's say I really love to play guitar. I love music, singing. That's one of my big hobbies. So if I wanted to make a career out of it, if I was good enough to, make it in the music world, then if I started to get paid for it, I probably wouldn't really want to do it anymore because I like to play my music because it makes me happy. It brings me joy and brings other people joy. So that's why I do it. I'm intrinsically motivated. If someone then starts paying me to play my music, that kind of puts an extra pressure on of like, well, now I can't fail at this thing. I have to do this. I need to make sure I'm always practicing every single day. That's an extrinsic reward that then is kind of demotivating me because I was already motivated myself. So that's the over justification effect. There's like too many incentives there, too much motivation coming from different places that it makes you like not want to do it at all. All right, so make sure you do know the over justification effect. It's something that's not necessarily like bolded in your text, might not even be written there, but it is something that occurs on the AP exam sometimes. All right, so what about curiosity? Is that something that can motivate you? Yes, absolutely. Think about the fact that there are monkeys who are monkeying around. They're trying to figure out how to unlock a latch that opens nothing. So that's just like, what's this thing? We want to play with it. What does it do? There's some other examples like this too of when, people might be trying to click on pens to see whether or not they deliver an electric shock or something. So obviously curiosity is something that can also influence you to want to do something when you're just like, what is this thing? And that kind of goes with intrinsic motivation. There's no reason that you're doing it except for that you want to know what this thing does. Okay, so what about seeking optimal levels of arousal? So please note that here with this module, we are talking about your like mental stimulation, your mental arousal, not sexual arousal. So just make sure you know what we're talking about here. So to optimize your mental arousal, we need to make sure we have the appropriate amount of stimulation. If we have too much, it's going to make us not want to engage in something. If we have too little, we're going to get bored. So there's this kind of theory here that helps us to figure out, so what's that perfect level of mental stimulation that we want to have? It's called the Yerkes-Dodson law. And it is saying that moderate arousal leads to optimal performance. So kind of like I was just saying, if you have too much arousal, it's something that's like too difficult, then you won't want to do it. If it's too easy, it's not stimulating your brain enough, you'll just get bored, so you won't want to do it. So it does vary a little bit based on if the task is something easy or difficult. If it's a really hard task, then you want to be a little bit less, have a little bit less arousal because, again, you want to make sure you can actually accomplish it. It's not too hard. And then if it's an easy task, you might need more arousal there because you don't want to be bored. So that moderate level in the middle is kind of your sweet spot. That's what the Yerkes-Dodson law is saying. And this is saying the same thing. So you can take a look at that slide. Our next theory of motivation is brought to us by Sir Abraham Maslow. He is someone you may have heard of before in his theory. It's one of those things that's just like kind of general knowledge sometimes. So you might have heard other people talking about it. So his idea is that human needs are hierarchical, meaning there's priorities of some needs over others. We don't just do everything equally. So he came up with this idea of the hierarchy of needs, and that's what this kind of pyramid thing is here. So he's saying that our needs begin with satisfying the things at the bottom of this hierarchy, and you can't really move to the next level until those lower levels have been satisfied. So I'm not going to be able to do anything about fulfilling my self-esteem and everything until I have first met my physiological needs, my things to survive, like hunger and thirst. I need to make sure I'm feeling safe also. I've got shelter and I'm feeling secure. I need to make sure that I am feeling love from other people. I have good relationships with others. Then I could finally start taking a look at my self-esteem needs. That's essentially what Maslow's hierarchy is saying. I just kind of like this image here. I think it's, kind of a joke of let's look at our modern day hierarchy of needs. I feel like a lot of people are like cell phone battery, first priority, can't do anything till I have that. Then got to make sure I have my Wi-Fi. Then I can take care of those other things. Like, yeah, I'll eat something after that, so just a little joke here, a spin on the Maslow's hierarchy. So you might have noticed at the top of Maslow's hierarchy, there are two other terms there, self-actualization and self-transcendence. So I'll go back to that real quick. So self-actualization is when you realize you want to be able to live up to your own full potential. So all the other physiological needs and safety, belongingness, esteem, those all need to be met before you can start focusing on like trying to be the best person you can be. That self-actualization, once you've gotten to being your own best self, Then you might be able to go to the absolute highest level, which is self-transcendent needs. So that is going beyond yourself now, and you're wanting to help find fulfilling ways to make other people happy and meet their needs. So self-actualization is about yourself fulfilling, becoming the best person like you can be. And then self-transcendence is, okay, so now I got to take care of other people too. What can I do to kind of give back? All right, so that's kind of what all this is saying here with self-transcendence. So is that order in Maslow's hierarchy fixed? No, again, it's like a theory, so that means it's not necessarily 100% set in stone, but there can be specific reasons why you might have one need that is replaced with another need. For example, when people have intentionally starved themselves to make a political statement, so they have the ability to have the need for hunger met, but they are choosing not to do that to make some kind of a point. Yet they're still able to get to those other levels on the hierarchy. So it's not a rigid set in stone thing, but it's just kind of something that helps to make us think about motivation. So based on that, let's answer this question here. Maslow's hierarchy of needs would have difficulty explaining why what. So this question's a little tricky. Make sure you're looking at the fact that it says it would make it difficult to explain which of these things. All right, and that is letter D. A prisoner engages in a hunger strike to improve their cell conditions. So again, you're intentionally not having one of your physiological needs met, even though you're higher up on the hierarchy there. All those other things are things that make sense according to his hierarchy. All right, so that's it for module 52, our like intro to motivation. So now let's go ahead and move on to hunger motivation specifically. So a specific branch in our talk about motivation now. So this is module 53. And by the way, I hope you're following along in your slide deck. Make sure you're filling all your terms in and everything. So I'm going to briefly summarize this study for you here, that basically there was a study conducted where people volunteered. This was not anything necessarily unethical. They agreed to participate in an experiment where people were kind of semi-starving themselves. So basically for 3 months, these men had all been fed a regular meal, normal food intake. But then after that, after those 3 months, they halved the food intake for some of those men. So they cut the amount of food they normally eat in half. And they wanted to see what happened because of that. So the people who then had their food cut in half, they became listless and apathetic. So basically, they were just tired. They weren't doing a lot because their body was trying to conserve energy as much as it could, since they didn't have as much food to help them with their energy. And then their body weight stabilized about 25% below their starting weights. So some of the psychological effects is they became obsessed with food. That's all they talked about, all they thought about. They would do things that related to talking about food, those kinds of things. They lost their motivation to fulfill some of their other needs because that was their primary need that they need to focus on. So it is kind of interesting what happens when we don't have food. And this was demonstrated in the movie Unbroken. If you've ever seen that, you can take a look here at exactly what they're saying about that, but that's just kind of an example we have in popular culture. So what about the physiological factors that produce hunger? Where does hunger actually come from? Is it just one thing of your stomach growls, oh, you're hungry? No, there's lots of different areas that contribute to the feelings of hunger. And they have done lots of different studies to figure out exactly which pieces relate here. So there's kind of 5 main areas we're going to talk about in terms of physiological, your bodily factors that relate to feelings of hunger. So we got stomach contractions, glucose, brain structures, appetite hormones, and your basal metabolic rate. So let's go ahead and dive into each of those 5 areas here. So starting first with stomach contractions, there was an experimenter who intentionally swallowed a balloon, which then could help to measure his stomach contractions. So like the balloon would expand or contract based on his hunger levels. And when this gentleman who swallowed the balloon, when he was feeling hungry, he would press a key to indicate, yep, I'm hungry right now, I'm feeling hungry. And they would see how it correlated with the way that the balloon would expand or contract. So that was a way that they could measure stomach contractions. And they did find that whenever Washburn, this is the guy who's doing it, whenever he felt hungry, he was indeed having stomach contractions. So that was one thing that told them stomach contractions are one way that let our body know you're hungry. But do we still have hunger without those stomach contractions? Yes, we do, because researchers have removed some rats' stomachs, which means they created a direct path to their small intestines, and the rats still continue to eat. So even without a stomach, there's something that makes us still want to continually eat. So, what are some of those other areas? Another area that contributes to hunger is glucose. And glucose is the form of sugar that circulates in the blood and provides the major source of energy for body tissues. So, glucose gives you energy. So, how does it impact your hunger? When your glucose levels drop, you won't consciously feel that lower blood sugar, but your brain is then kind of starting to trigger some things because of that lower glucose, and that's what then triggers the hunger. So we have different appetite hormones that are released from different parts of your body, like your hypothalamus, your stomach, intestines, pancreas, which all kind of help to signal to your brain that you should be eating or you should not be eating. Kind of based on some of the things we're seeing there, we've also got brain structures that contribute to hunger motivation. So our hypothalamus in the brain, remember that piece, that is something that is very, very important to hunger. And your hypothalamus is one of those things that helps to control to regulate your body to maintain homeostasis. So that's why the hypothalamus is at play here. So make sure you definitely know that that is one of the parts of the brain that is very important. And specifically, there's kind of two different parts of the hypothalamus that are really important. And you do want to make sure you know the difference between these two. So we have the lateral hypothalamus and the ventromedial hypothalamus. So the lateral hypothalamus stimulates, when it's stimulated, that then stimulates hunger. So if the lateral hypothalamus is being triggered in some sort of way, that will signal hunger to your body. If you lesion, so if you surgically remove the lateral hypothalamus from someone, that then inhibits the hunger signals, meaning that someone won't know that they are hungry. So then they're not going to be eating as much as they should be, and they might start to kind of accidentally starve themselves. Then we have the ventromedial hypothalamus. And when that part of the brain is stimulated, it inhibits hunger. So it's going to make you less hungry. It's going to tell you, listen, you're good. You don't need to keep eating here. And that's what satiety is. Like, it's telling you you're full, your body's full, so you don't need to keep doing that. But if you lesion the ventromedial hypothalamus, you take that part out of someone's brain, then that's going to inhibit those signals of feeling full. So your brain's not going to be telling you, all right, you're good. You don't need to eat anymore now. And then you're going to accidentally overeat. And that could lead to someone becoming overweight or potentially obese when your brain's not helping to signal to you that you should stop eating now. So some silly ways you can remember the difference between the two, which does which. The lateral hypothalamus, we like to say the phrase, I'm laterally so hungry right now. You know, like literally so hungry, but laterally so hungry. So the lateral hypothalamus is what increases your hunger, that lets your body know you're hungry. The ventromedial hypothalamus, the VMH, I just like to remember as it's very minimal hunger, meaning like you're not hungry. Your body's telling you, stop, you're not hungry anymore. All right, so those are just some ways you can hopefully remember that a little bit. Yes, and I did talk about this area here, so you can take another look at that if you need to. All right, so what about appetite hormones? We're looking at those now. And remember, hormones are kind of throughout your body, so we're not necessarily focusing on the brain anymore here. So we've got insulin, leptin, and PYY, which all help to decrease your appetite. So again, telling your body, you're good, stop eating. Then we have ghrelin and orexin, which both increase your appetite. They tell your body, I'm hungry, give me food. So let's look at each of those a little bit. You can see orexin is up there in the brain, and those other ones are down, located more towards your stomach area. So orexin is a hunger triggering hormone. It's produced by the hypothalamus. Ghrelin is secreted by when your stomach is empty, and that's what sends that signal of I'm hungry. A way that I like to remember what ghrelin does is that ghrelin makes your stomach growl, you know, when your stomach's like, "Rrr." So ghrelin makes your stomach growl, and that means you're hungry. Next, we have insulin. It is also located down here in your pancreas. So it is a hormone secreted that controls your blood glucose level. Leptin then is a protein hormone that is secreted by your fat cells. And when we have a lot of leptin, it causes your brain to increase your metabolism and decrease hunger. And then finally, we have PYY, peptide, tyrosine. Honestly, no idea why it's named that. That is a hormone in your digestive tract, and it sends that signal of I am not hungry to the brain. So I highly recommend you go back and look at this slide again here to make sure you know these top three, insulin, leptin, and PYY, all decrease your appetite. Ghrelin and orexin both increase your appetite. But I do have another little handy trick for you here to remember what these things do. I got this from another teacher. So you can remember the phrase I go, and that means that those are the letters I for insulin, G for ghrelin, O for orexin. If you have to get up and go somewhere, you will do that because you are hungry. So you will get up and go. So I go when I'm hungry. So that means if you are getting up, when these things are up, insulin, ghrelin, and orexin, you're going to be hungry. On the other hand, think of the acronym GULP. When you gulp something, you're like swallowing it down, you're just gulping it down. So if you're gulping down, that means when these things that spell out GULP, when they are down, that means that you're going to be hungry. So if you have low glucose, low leptin, or low PYY, that's going to make you hungry. All right, so those are some other ways to help you kind of remember the roles of those different chemicals and appetite hormones. So what about this question here? Leptin, a protein that causes hunger when its levels are low, is secreted by which of those things? That is letter A, the fat cells. Awesome. All right, so next we're going to talk about this thing called the set point theory. And that's the thought that your body has a certain weight that it's kind of like fixed at. So occasionally that might increase or decrease. Say, you know, you have a big celebration, you're eating lots of food that day. Yeah, you might gain a little weight for a little bit, but then eventually your body will kind of adjust back down to its kind of set rate that it has. It's your body weight set point. So some people though are like, that's not necessarily true because it can be this slow process that happens over time that you have these sustained changes in your body that if you're continually like overeating over time, then your set point's going to get higher. You're going to gain some weight there and vice versa. But it's just a theory, but it is the idea that we kind of have this like central point for our bodies where your weight will tend to go back towards. And you can read that on your own here. All right, and then finally with our motivators physiologically for hunger, we have the basal metabolic rate. And that is how your body helps to regulate your weight, which is controlled by your food intake, your energy output, and your basal metabolic rate. So the basal metabolic rate is the resting rate of energy expenditure for maintaining basic body functions. So remember that study where they had some volunteers to kind of like semi-starve themselves. They decreased their food intake a lot. They found that those folks reduced their energy expenditure, partly because they were kind of more inactive because they were so tired to do anything, but also because of a 29% drop in their basal metabolic rate. So it wasn't just that they weren't moving as much, but it was also because of a drop in their basal metabolic rate. So now we need to think about some other factors besides just your physiological needs that can contribute to hunger. So looking more at the like sociocultural side of things, so society and cultural influences on hunger. One thing to think about is people with amnesia. And if you have amnesia, that means there's some kind of damage with your hippocampus, and it's just a normal thing that can happen to some people over time, that you start to have a decrease in your memory. Um, and they found that with those people with amnesia, that they found 20 minutes after eating a normal lunch, the patients were offered another meal, but they readily consumed it. So even though they had just eaten, they still were fine to eat again. They were like, oh yeah, sure, I'll eat something, because they didn't remember they just ate. So it's not necessarily all just things happening going on in your body that contribute to your hunger. It's also the fact that we have your memories a part of, oh, I just ate, so I probably don't need to eat again for a while. And how does culture influence hunger? So just think about different cultures of foods that are more appealing to you because of your culture, your cultural dynamics and everything. Foods that are not appealing to you because of your cultural dynamics. So it's interesting to see how some cultures are like, yes, I love this thing. And other cultures are like, ew, how could you ever eat that thing? That's obviously something that will influence your hunger and what things you choose to eat. So for example, Peruvians like to eat roasted guinea pig. Personally, I would never choose to eat that on my own, but that is something that is culturally influenced. It's something I'm not used to just because I did not grow up in that culture. Also, some cultures, like Alaska Natives, tend to prefer whale blubber, but that's not necessarily true of all people who live here in North America. And then, is there a relationship between geography and food spices? There is. Countries with hotter climates, where food historically spoils more quickly, it goes bad quicker, they feature recipes with more bacteria inhibiting spices. So if it has more spices in it, it'll probably last a little longer. So just kind of interesting how that all goes together there. Also, different situational factors influence your eating behavior. So if you are watching some kind of action movie, something like that going on, that tends to make you want to snack a little more, rather than if it's like a really boring interview or something, then you might not really feel the need to eat. But if it's action, you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, give me some more popcorn. So also think about too that there are just some situational triggers that in your mind, you go to a movie theater, you might associate that with popcorn. So that's going to be something that's making you more likely to eat. You might not necessarily be hungry, but it's like, oh, you go to the movies, you eat popcorn. It's just something you do. Also, when we are around others, most of us do tend to eat more as well. So you might realize after a party where there's all this food laid out and everything, you might realize you probably overate a bit, because there were other people around, and it's something you just do in a social situation. You talk and you eat a little bit, that kind of thing. Serving size definitely plays a part in it too. So you can kind of take a look at that slide there. But basically, they saw that when offered a supersized portion of something, people do tend to consume that more. They will eat more of it. When given a bigger plate, people will then eat more pasta. Like basically, the bigger your plate, the more likely you are to fill that whole plate. So if you have a smaller plate, then you'll probably put less food on your plate and you won't eat as much. And we do have some like healthy cooking shows and everything, but we have found that fewer people than ever in America are at home cooking their own meals. A lot of that is also socially influenced because we have a very fast-paced society. People are working, having to take care of children, all those kinds of things. Also having buffets, that definitely increases eating as well because there's many different choices. So you might want a little bit of everything rather than if only one thing was offered, you probably wouldn't eat quite as much of just that one thing. So we're definitely doing some things as a country to hopefully work towards better nutrition a bit. So President Barack Obama was doing some things to help to contribute science to how we can work towards better nutrition. So things like changing our food lunch systems and everything a bit. Yeah, there's some other things with that too. So your physical health risks that are associated with obesity are diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, gallstones, arthritis, and certain types of cancer. So our country, unfortunately, is continuing on a trend of becoming more and more obese. And that is something that we do need to make sure we kind of can get some control over because it is something that is significantly impactful to your health. So it is important to make sure that as a society, we are, since your brain can kind of trick you in all those different ways of telling you you're hungry when you're not, it's important that we have certain like restaurants and regulations in place to make sure that we're not just trying to get people to consume more because that makes more money. So we also have your body mass index. That's a way to kind of determine your sense of healthiness, I guess you could say. So it's a measurement of your body fat that's based on your weight in relation to your height. Obviously, you can't just compare one person to another and their weights, because one person might be 6'1" and the other person might be 4'5". So obviously, you need to make sure you're taking those two things together, and that's what your body mass index does. If you're curious to find your own, you can go to that link there. Storing fat in the past has been adaptive, going back to that evolutionary perspective. Our bodies are made to store fat so that you can make sure that you are carrying yourself over if there was a period of time where you didn't get food or something like that. But obviously this can kind of start to have an impact on us now if we are continuing to store that fat and we're not really getting rid of it or anything. And your set point kind of can contribute to obesity as well. Sleep deprivation can also contribute to obesity, so keep that in mind, because if you are not sleeping as much, that increases the release of ghrelin. Remember, it makes your stomach growl. So it's telling you more that you're hungry. And sleep deprivation decreases the release of leptin, which is also telling your body, it's giving your body reports of body fat. So it's really dangerous that if you're eating more and you're not alerting the brain to that fat accumulation, you're going to gain weight. So healthy sleep habits are very, very important for sure. All right, so you can take a look at that question on your own, but that is it. I apologize that this is a lengthy video, but we covered 2 modules here, basically the intro to motivation and then some hunger motivation. So please make sure you are keeping up with your slide decks and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.